saying expert in her field. I told him that the older I get, the least I feel like an expert in anything. Kind of learned that the older I get, the more that I don't know, and find that out. But I wanted to talk tonight a little bit about courage. You know, specifically about, you know, where you're at in your stage of life. You know, kind of taking ownership of your relationship with Christ and how that looks moving forward. So who knows, like, what does courage mean to you guys? What does that word mean? Anyone? So hey, courage. Does anyone have? What does it mean to you? Courage. So courage doesn't mean you're not afraid, right? That's not what courage is. Courage doesn't mean you can blindly walk into any situation and not be afraid or anything else like that. Courage is the ability to move forward with something when you are afraid. And sometimes that fear is warranted. A lot of times it's warranted. And how you mix that with God's calling is something that you learn through trial and error a lot of times. Just always remember Christ died on the cross because we don't have to be perfect. And so when you take that need to be for perfection away, it releases you from a lot of that fear moving forward. So having said that, talking about courage, if anyone's interested, and there may or may not be a point to these, I don't know. I have pig's feet, semi-boneless, so there might be pieces of bone in here, in vinegar. And I have sardines and oil, if anyone's hungry. Does anyone want to take a bite? Which one do you want, Matthew? Which one do you want? All right. Chunk. It's like literally a foot in there.
I might just back.
There you go. Look at that, everyone. Okay. So this is a true story. When I was dating Mrs. Palmer, and the first time I met her mom, she invited me over to her house, and we were having little fish for dinner. I had never had a sardine in my life. But that's what her mom served for dinner, with sardines and rice and some other stuff. And so like I had to eat it with a smile on my face, and then I immediately left and went to McDonald's to the drive-thru to get that taste out of my mouth. But it was a point, right, where we're seriously dating and I want to move forward. And so, you know, it's an impression that you like culturally speaking, that you want to be respectful of what they're giving. She laid out what she thought was an elegant meal for me, and even though it wasn't what I liked, wasn't something I'm used to, like I had to eat that with a smile on my face and be respectful, because if I don't do that, right, you really lose the ability to have a relationship with the people around you. And so kind of the same thing with Christ. You know, if you go into if you're in different parts of the world, there's a good chance that you're going to be able to have to sit down with someone and eat something that you're not used to eating. The worst thing I ever ate in my life was camel. And it was just a plate of fat with some chunks of meat in it. And I'm like a sirloin guy. Like, I don't like fat. I cut all the fat off my stuff and everything else like that. So, I mean, I just had to choke it down. But what they laid out in front of me was it was a poor family, a poor Muslim family that I was trying to minister to. And I was young in my relationship with Christ myself. And I just felt like, you know, to them, they were laying out this beautiful delicacy, and they were so proud of the food they gave me, and I'm just sitting there thinking to myself while we're praying, like, how do I get through this, God? Like, where's the strength to get through this without, like, just, you know, choking it down? And so, you know, foods can be disgusting and stuff like that, but relatively, you know, it's just uncomfortable and things like that. But how do you move forward with something like when Christ is calling you to do something? And you know, you'll read a lot of things about, like, you know, Christ spoke to me, or I heard Christ tell me to do this and that. And I don't discount those things, but that hasn't been my experience with God. Usually for me, when it comes to ministering to something, like there's a need in front of me, something is put in front of me. You know, there's no audible voice or nothing that just clearly says you should do this, other than I look at what's in front of me and I look at Scripture and I look at, you know, who Christ was and how Christ acted on this earth, and I just feel like it's the right thing to do. And sometimes, you know, almost always my prayer is, God, I'm moving forward with this, and I pray that you bless it, or if I'm moving forward outside of what you want me to do, I pray that you kill it right away. Like for me, the worst frustration is being 2 years down the road and just toiling and things. And part of that for me, too, is also having changed my mind on what success is, right? There's this Hollywood version of success out there, right? I call it the Lifetime channel, where you go through this dark tide and then at the end everything works out and stuff, but that's not necessarily always God's plan, and the outcome isn't always the justification of whether what you were doing was in God's calling, right? It could be, I think back over my time frame and like the people that had a hand in me coming to Christ, and I'd love to go back and say, hey man, those times you prayed and I mocked you or you did this, like people don't know about my saving faith now from like high school and things like that I'd love to know. I'd love to tell them, like, man, you were part of that, right? When it came time to make my decision for Christ, you were part of that body of evidence that led me to move into my salvation. But most of the people that had that point in there, I've lost contact with. I don't know where they're at now, and they don't know. And so for me, just being part of something, being part of God's plan is enough. I don't have to be like the victorious guy at the end, right? I don't have to see like, this Hollywood ending to what I'm doing. And so as you guys move forward, right, right now, you may or may not feel safety in numbers. Like if you go out and you're ministering in the community and stuff, it feels a little bit more comfortable when you're in, in a group of believers around you and things like that. And that's part of that maturation process. But there's going to be a time in your life where it's you against the crowd, right? It's you against a group. It's you in another country that doesn't believe, and you're trying to minister, and you have 20 people that disagree with you. And there's part of a learning curve that comes along with that. And being able to see, being able to understand who God is and look back through your life and understand that, we talk about faith, but we don't talk about blind faith, right? Our faith is not a blind faith. We have the Bible to match things up against. You're at a time in your life, at an age where you can be able to reflect back on the last 5 years, let's say, your life or something like that. It's not, not a set time period, but to be able to see God's hand in your stuff. And so if someone wants to read real quick, Matthew, we're going to talk about, tonight we're going to talk a little bit about having the courage to seek God's calling when he calls you, and we're going to talk about what happens when you miss that calling, right? When God puts something in front of you and for whatever reason you don't grasp that opportunity. So if someone wants to read, we're going to read Matthew 18 through 23. Anyone wants to read it?
Matthew 4:18 through 23, is that what you said?
Yeah.
Let's read.
Well, I have the Bible, you stole it.
Can you bring a Sprite for anyone who would be willing to eat the pig's feet? Because that's not going to agree with stuff.
So, and I can read if no one else wants to. But so picture, we're going to read, what we're reading about here is the disciples being called. And just think about where you're at in your life and understand that these disciples that are being called right now are way closer to your age than they are to my age, right? These are young men, or probably early 20s, maybe even late teens, like you guys, some of you are and stuff like that. So these are not people my age, right? They're people really guys your age. So did anyone want to read it?
I can read it.
Okay.
It's 17 through 23, right?
Yes, please.
Okay. From that time on, Jesus began to preach, "Repent, for the kingdom of heaven has come to earth." As Jesus was walking beside the Sea of Galilee, he saw two brothers, Simon called Peter and his brother Andrew. They were casting a net into the lake, for they were fishermen. "Come, follow me," Jesus said, "and I will send you out to fish for men." At once they left their nets and followed him. Going on from there, he saw two other brothers, James, son of Zebedee, and his brother John. They were in a boat with their father Zebedee, preparing their nets to fish, and Jesus called them. Immediately they left the boat and their father and followed Jesus. Jesus went throughout Galilee, teaching in the synagogues, proclaiming the good news of the kingdom, and healing every disease and sickness among the people.
So we're at the beginning of Jesus' ministry, right? He's been baptized. He started to baptize people. But this is really the start of Jesus' ministry. So Jesus is walking by the Sea of Galilee, and that's where kind of, that's downtown Denver, let's say, right? That's where the hub of activity is. There's a lot of, that's where money's all made off of the Sea of Galilee in this town and stuff like that. So it's a place of commerce. But Jesus doesn't come rolling up heavy, right? He doesn't have an entourage. He's not pushing a solid gold cart. He's not being towed by a team of Arabian horses or even donkeys for that matter, right? He's just a peasant-looking guy that comes rolling up to these dudes that are working, right? They're paying the bills. They're out there working every day. And he's like, follow me, I'll make you fishers of men. And so these guys have a moment right then. They've got a choice to make right on the spot. Do I drop what I'm doing? Literally don't care about where I'm living tonight, because Jesus doesn't appear to have like a house or a mansion that they're going to move into or anything else like that. They've got to say, do I put it all on the line right now and walk away from this? And then beyond that, when they make that choice in the quiet time of that night, right, when everyone's going to sleep, they've got to relive that choice. Like, did I make the right choice? And so you can, I don't know what I would have done. I would love to say that I would have dropped my nets and gone too, but man, that's a huge choice to make, right? And so, what if God does that to you, right? What if you get through college or you're working or something like that, and God just imprints on your heart that I want you to be a missionary over here, in some country. Name it, right? Throw a dart at the wall in whatever country it lands on. It could be the U.S. It could be portions of the U.S. But you don't know where you're going to live. You don't know where that support's going to come from. How do you make that choice to be faithful to God in that moment? And what happens if you don't, right? So I want to read one more verse. We're going to jump forward in the story to Jesus right before his death. So if someone wants to read, we're going to be in Matthew. Sorry, getting old. Matthew 26, 69 through 73. Right, yeah, 73. So I'll read it. So think about this, Jesus, the Last Supper, Peter's been like, he's cut the ear, he's been the guy, right? Jesus, I'll die for you. He said all this stuff. Jesus looked at him and even told him, you're going to deny me. And Peter's like, no way, man. Like, there's no way I'm going to deny you. So we fast forward, and it's Peter sitting outside the courtyard, and the servant girl comes up to him and said, little girl, right, accusing him. And the servant girl came up to him and said, you also were with Jesus the Galilean. But he denied it before them all, saying, I do not know what you mean. And when he went out of the entrance, another servant girl saw him. And she said to the bystanders, this man was with Jesus of Nazareth. And again he denied it with an oath. I do not know the man. And after a little while, the bystanders came up and said to Peter, certainly you too are one of them, for your accent betrays you. Then he began to invoke a curse on himself and to swear, I do not know the man. So he gets really agitated, right? He's just vehemently denying that he knows Christ. Less than 24 hours after he looked Christ in the eye and told him that he would defend him to his death. But what do we know about Peter after that? Right? Huge mistake, right? As soon as Peter says that, right, he just breaks down. He's in tears. He knows that he just failed immensely. So Peter has a choice, right? He's humiliated. God even told him, right? I mean, that makes it even worse. God's like, Christ is like, you're gonna betray me, man. You're gonna deny me. He's like, no way. And less than 24 hours later, he does it, animated. So Peter has a choice, right? He made a mistake. And God doesn't condemn him. But Peter has a choice. And a lot of the choice that Judas made too, right? We see two different examples there. Judas kills himself. Peter finishes strong, right? Peter goes on to live a life for Christ, to be an integral part of spreading the gospel around the world. But there's that point in there where he's got to make that choice. And understand too that the spiritual warfare that goes on for you guys, right? We always talk about, like, when I was in the military, we talk about things like one person's a waste of ammunition, 3 people's a target. And the point is being that you don't waste your ammunition and stuff on things that aren't a threat. So if you're not actively pursuing God's will, the Great Commission, right, that we know about, to spread the word, then you're not a threat. Satan doesn't have to come after you. But in those moments like that, when you're serving God and you have a failure, you have a choice to make, and Satan's going to be in your ear saying you're not good enough. You made a mistake, right? You can't go on. You can't do these things. You're just not good enough. And God allows that to happen to help build you, right? And God allowed his son to be tempted in the wilderness, right? It's part of that growth process. And ideally, you know, those things happen small, and you build up, you make time. You know, you think about like Peter's life leading up to that point and stuff like that, you know. Peter's my favorite disciple just because I always say, I use the term he was stupid for God. Like, for me, I never feel like I'm in tune with God's timing, let's say. But I've always like committed myself that if I'm not in God's timing, I want to be out ahead of him. I don't want to be a mile behind him. I would rather have God say, get behind me, than catch up to me. You know what I mean? And so like I look at that part where he's like, get behind me, Satan. And like for me, that's for, you know, when I think about Peter, like that's almost a badge of honor. Like you're just out there, man. You're working, you're doing it, you're laying it on the line, right? You're taking chances, you're taking risks. And sometimes like God's got to pull you back. But that's a good place to be, right? Taking smart risks and going out there and having the will, being willing to put it on the line. And for me, like I was saying earlier, I don't have a clear picture of what God has next for me. But when I look back over my life, like some of the things that I thought were disappointments and things like that, like I see God's hand just guiding me around minefields and things like that, and just getting me where I'm at now. And like there's just this clear picture looking back, like a reflection. Like, hey, that's what God's plan was better than my plan. Like I had this expectation for this ministry, or I thought it was going to do this, or I thought it was going to go there. And then I look at 5 or 10 years later, and I'm like, it's nowhere it is nothing like what I thought it was going to be, but it's so much better. And I've learned so much along the way. And that's part of it, like that maturation process of making mistakes. I don't even like to use the term failure. The only thing to me that's failure is if something goes wrong and you don't learn anything from it. Like if something goes wrong and you learn something from it, that's not a failure. And so, you know, to give you a story in my life, and I was actually going to use a different story until this week. So I've had this, I don't know if you want to call it a vision or what, I just feel God leading me towards starting a ranch, and the ranch will be geared towards adults with disabilities, mostly cognitive disabilities, where we can look at, like, we can take adults that are basically institutionalized in their home, right? There's all these programs leading up for kids with learning disabilities and things like that. Once they hit 18, those programs pretty much go away. So a lot of the more severely disabled kids, when they turn to adults, are really just stuck in front of a TV and institutionalized inside their houses. And so what my vision here is to start this ranch where we tailor jobs towards, a lot of stuff on a ranch isn't really, it doesn't take a lot of, just ability other than, to be able to do work and stuff like that. So, I've been working with cattle and playing around with different animals and stuff like that, trying to learn the trade so that when the timing's right, that I'm ready to make that move. So I'm kind of building up this herd, and, I've gone out and I kind of restarted with the cattle, and I got some new heifers. So heifer's a female cow who's never had a baby and stuff like that, right? So this week, one of my good heifers, it was time to breed her. And it just happened that she went into that time at night and stuff, and so I had to throw her in the trailer and take her over to my friend's house to help me do it. So I leave our house, and I make a right turn onto 86, and as I'm going around the corner, you got the big gate in the back, and then you have an escape gate. So when you're loading them, there's a side door that if the cattle go crazy or something, you can go out the side door. And that's where the light was, so I've gone out that side door to turn the light on and off in the trailer, and when I closed it, I didn't latch the door all the way. So I made this right turn, and I just saw that door come open, just like out of the reflection of my turn signal. And it was right on 86, like right at the top of the hill where people can't see, and I just steered right over the side of the road and slammed on the brakes and jumped out and went around there. And I had tied her into the trailer to keep her head up and stuff like that. So she was out the door of the trailer, still tied in from her head, and her head was like basically in the trailer, and her body was laying outside. And I thought she was dead. And I was kind of devastated. I jumped in the trailer and I pulled the quick release knot that you use like when you're doing cattle. And as soon as the pressure came off, she jumped to her feet and she jumped right back in the trailer. But as she pushed up against the side of the trailer, I saw a big smear of blood in there and stuff. So I slammed the door shut, threw a U-turn, went back to my house, and got her what we call squeeze chute, and got lights on her and stuff like that. she had a really big road rash on her hip, and then she had a cut down on her hock area and stuff like that. So we immediately started cleaning it, and I was texting pictures to the vet and everything else like that. And I had some antibiotics. We got it started on antibiotics, and we cleaned it up and stuff. But I was kind of devastated, right? Because it was kind of carelessness on my part, just not double checking that door. And I would have rather been the one who fell out with my head tied to the thing than one of my animals. Because even though these are production animals, like, I don't take their lives lightly. And so I was up all night, and my head was just swimming with stuff. And I just really wanted to quit. Like, I just was like I was kind of broken in a way. I just felt so bad, right? What this girl had gone through and stuff, and how close she came. And then I also realized that, like, you know, God's providence in this, because she really should have been dead. I mean, that door is 2 feet away from the double axles on my trailer, and how she didn't go under those axles, I have no idea. And the fact that she's walking around without a limp and healing up fine and everything, but it just kind of made, you know, but the devil's in my ear, right? You're not cut out for this. Like, you made a dumb mistake, right? You're not good enough to do this, because if you were, you wouldn't have made that mistake and everything else like that. And this is where having Christian friends and stuff come into play, because I just really needed to talk to a couple of my Christian friends. And one of my friends, Lad, came over that day, and he's got a lot of livestock experience, so he was helping me clean her up again the next day and everything. And like, he just talked to me from a Christian's perspective and stuff like that, and just really, like, just hearing the words, like, even though I thought about those same words, like, hearing them come from a Christian brother really helped me re-engage, and just really helped me understand that you know, I need to learn something from that, right? I need to put in procedures if that never happens again. But that voice in my head telling me I'm not good enough, and telling me that, you know, I should quit this, you know, it took me a day, but I finally understood that, you know, that was Satan's voice in there. And then it was almost reassuring to me, okay, if Satan's gonna be this aggressive with me stopping this, it was kind of reassurance, like, that, okay, this is God's plan, right? This is a plan that God put in front of me, because if it wasn't, Satan would have no business being part of that. And I've learned that looking back over my life, and being able to have that, you know, being able to have that perspective of God working with you, and God understanding that part of who he created us and our imprint of him is that we make mistakes along the way, and that as a loving Father, he forgives us of those mistakes. And part of that growth and seeing it mature and seeing that, it's like, you know, some of you guys graduated from college this week, right? Or from high school this week, this last month. And how proud your parents were and stuff like that. I mean, you know, as a father now, like, I see how Jesus and how God sees us in that light. Like, all kinds of mistakes, you know, guarantee you nobody's in here has gotten to be the age you're at now without getting into it with your parents at some point, right? I mean, it just happens. That's just part of growing up. And sometimes your parents are wrong and you like to point it out. And sometimes you're wrong and they like to point it out. But the point is that, like, through all that stuff, like, there's just this proud moment when it happens. And I'm at a point in my life where, like, I understand that that's how God sees me. And so even though it was a bad week and stuff like that, like, I also understand that God's, like, you know, joyful that I'm back engaged and we're moving forward. And so that's the part where I talk about having the courage. You know, having courage to step out in faith and to say, I don't have all the answers. I don't know how this is going to end. And, you know, to be able to move forward with that and have that faith. And I know you guys are going to talk about that a little bit more in small groups. We've got some questions for you and stuff like that. And this stuff was kind of a joke. I mean, partially a joke, right? I mean, some things are dumb, like, you know, just having someone eat this without it having a purpose would be kind of dumb. But it had a purpose to show that, you know, sometimes you have to do things that are uncomfortable and you have to have that ability. And eating food that's uncomfortable is kind of a low level. But if that's what it takes, you know, let's start and you build on that and you build on that. And you understand that we serve a God who's involved in every day of our life, right? That loves us as part of it, that lets us go through things so that we get better and we can grow closer to him. And if everything went perfect the whole time, you know, it's kind of like what we talked about, what Pastor talked about in Job today, right? I mean, without Job going through that, you could never say his friends were wrong. When his friends told him that, okay, you're like that because God gave you everything. Well, unless, you know, God let him suffer so that he could prove that that was wrong. And we see that in the Bible. I mean, God allowed Peter's, mistakes to be in the Bible for a reason. And it's so that we understand that it's okay to make mistakes. Like that's part of the process. And I can tell you this, if you go through life serving Christ and there's never an uncomfortable moment, or you never make a mistake, or you never have to go to someone and say you're sorry and stuff, I would tell you you're not pushing it hard enough. You need to put your foot down on that gas pedal a little bit harder. So, courage.
Thank you, Robert.